Right now, somewhere on the internet, someone is watching you. Not in a dramatic movie villain kind of way, not someone hunched over a keyboard in a dark room, personally watching your screen. No, it's quieter than that, more invisible, more patient. It's a machine, an algorithm, a system so deeply woven into the fabric of the internet that most people don't even notice it anymore. It knows which articles you read at 2 a.m. It knows how long you hovered over that product before you closed the tab. It knows your habits, your fears, your curiosity, your boredom. And for millions of people around the world, that realization was the moment everything changed. They got angry. They got paranoid. They started asking questions they'd never asked before. Questions like, who owns my data? Who built the system? Who benefits from knowing everything about me? And then, many of them discovered Linux. And for a while, it felt like freedom. Let's go back a few years. Windows 10 had just launched. Microsoft was pushing automatic updates, collecting diagnostic data, watching how you used your system, and sending it all back home. People discovered that even if you said no to certain settings, data was still leaving your computer. Then came the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Facebook had been quietly handing over the personal data of tens of millions of people to a political consulting firm. Nobody had consented to that. Nobody had read the fine print carefully enough. And suddenly the phrase that had been floating around tech circles for years hit the mainstream like a truck. If the product is free, you are the product. It was catchy. It was terrifying. And it felt true. Apple was selling your location. Google was reading your emails. Smart TVs were watching you watch them. And all of it, every single bit of it, was buried in terms of service documents that nobody actually read, written in legal language designed to be incomprehensible. People wanted out. But out of what exactly? And where would they go? That's when Linux entered the conversation for a whole new generation of users. Linux isn't new. It's been around since 1991, when a Finnish computer science student named Linus Torvalds decided he wanted to build his own operating system and share it with the world for free. Not free like a free trial, free like genuinely, completely, forever free. You can download it, install it, modify it, share it, break it, rebuild it. Nobody can take it away from you. And unlike Windows or Mac OS, Linux is open source. That means the code is public. Anyone in the world can open it up and read exactly what it does. There are no secret instructions hiding inside. No invisible rooms in the code. The blueprint is public. For a generation of people burned by corporate surveillance, that sounded like salvation. Privacy-focused YouTube channels exploded. Guides appeared everywhere. People started installing Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, Arch Linux, distributions of Linux, each one a different flavor of the same core idea. Tech-savvy users switched completely. Privacy advocates called it the only responsible choice. Forum posts described it like a religious awakening, like finally leaving a cult. The message was clear, simple, and deeply seductive. Switch to Linux, escape the surveillance machine, and finally be free. And it wasn't entirely wrong, but it wasn't entirely right either. Because here's what those forum posts, YouTube videos, and breathless Reddit threads left out. Something that feels uncomfortable to say, especially in privacy-focused communities where Linux is almost like a religion. The operating system is not the biggest privacy threat you face anymore. Let that sit for a second. When you switch to Linux, you remove a layer of corporate surveillance. Microsoft stops getting your telemetry data. That matters. It's a real improvement. But it's a little bit like moving out of a neighborhood with noisy neighbors, and then spending all your time at a shopping mall that tracks your every move through cameras, loyalty cards, and your phone's location data. The operating system is one layer. But the internet is where most people actually live, and the internet doesn't care what's installed on your computer. To understand why, you need to understand something called browser fingerprinting. And to understand that, imagine this. You walk into a store wearing a disguise. No name tag, no ID, no loyalty card. You think you're anonymous, but the store has cameras, and the cameras notice your height, your walk, the color of your jacket, the specific shoes you're wearing, which hand you use to pick things up, how long you pause in front of certain shelves. Nobody knows your name, but every time you come back, the system recognizes you instantly, because the combination of all those small details, it's unique to you. You're not hiding. You're just not carrying a card that says your name. That's browser fingerprinting. When you visit a website, your browser sends a staggering amount of information without you ever knowing. Your screen resolution, your operating system, your browser version, the fonts installed on your system, the plugins you're running, the time zone, the language settings, your graphics card, how your browser renders certain images. No single detail identifies you, but combined, they paint a portrait. And that portrait is almost certainly unique to your device. Here's the brutal part. This happens on Linux too. It doesn't matter that you're not running Windows. It doesn't matter that Firefox is open source. The fingerprint still forms. The tracker still sees you. And unless you're taking very specific steps to blur or randomize those signals, you're just as identifiable as any Windows user browsing in Chrome. And browser fingerprinting is only one piece of the puzzle. Think about the websites you visit every day. Major news sites, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, Gmail, Amazon. Almost all of them are running third-party scripts in the background, invisible pieces of code loaded from external servers designed to follow you from site to site, building a profile of your behavior across the entire internet. You visit a tech news site. That site has a Facebook tracking pixel embedded in the page. You never clicked anything. You never logged in. But Facebook's servers received a notification that your device visited that page. Then you go to a recipe site. Same thing. Then a sports forum. Same thing. By the end of the day, Facebook or Google or Amazon or any of 100 advertising networks has a fairly detailed map of your online life. And Linux didn't stop any of that, because none of that happened at the operating system level. It happened in your browser, on websites built by companies who chose to embed these trackers, made possible by an advertising economy built on knowing everything about you. Let's talk about Google for a second, because this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable for a lot of Linux users. Most people who switch to Linux do it for privacy reasons. They're sick of Microsoft, they're suspicious of Apple, they want control, they want transparency. So they install a privacy-focused Linux distribution, set up Firefox, maybe even add a few privacy extensions, and then they open Gmail and Google Calendar, and Google Drive, and YouTube, and Google Maps on their phone, and they search using Google because the habit is too strong to break. Google's business model is one of the most sophisticated surveillance systems ever built. And it doesn't live in your operating system. It lives in services, in accounts, in apps, in the subtle invisible threads that connect your behavior across dozens of platforms. Google Analytics is installed on something like 85% of websites. When you visit most sites on the internet, regardless of your operating system, Google's servers are notified. They see a request, they log something. And if you're signed into any Google account anywhere, or if your browser fingerprint or IP address has been associated with a Google account before, the picture keeps filling in. You can run the most private Linux distribution on the planet, but if you're using Gmail, you're handing your private communications to a company whose entire existence depends on monetizing information. The operating system never had a chance to save you from that. Now, this is the moment where Linux advocates usually jump in and say, but what about the telemetry? Windows is worse. Windows is actively spying on you through the operating system itself. And they're right. Windows 10 and Windows 11 collect a significant amount of data about your system. Diagnostic data, usage data, typing data at various points, and more. Even when you minimize privacy settings, a baseline level of data collection continues. Linux distros are generally much, much better here. The code is open. If a distribution were secretly collecting your data, someone would likely notice. Someone would read the code and expose it. But generally much better and completely private are not the same thing. Ubuntu, one of the most popular Linux distributions, the one millions of people recommend to beginners, had a genuinely controversial moment back in 2012. They introduced a feature in the default search bar that, when you typed something to search your own computer, also sent those searches to Amazon to show you shopping results. Your local search queries were leaving your computer without your knowledge. Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, eventually removed it after massive backlash, but it happened. A privacy-focused Linux distribution quietly added data collection, and most users never knew. More recent versions of Ubuntu send anonymous usage data by default. You can turn it off, but many users never even see the prompt, and many beginners wouldn't know to look. This isn't an attack on Ubuntu, it's a reminder of something important. Even open source projects are made by human beings who need funding, human beings who sometimes make compromises, which brings us to something even more uncomfortable. The assumption that open source automatically means safe. When people say Linux is open source, they mean anyone can read the code. That sounds like a guarantee of safety. If the code were doing something bad, someone would catch it, right? In theory, yes. In practice, it's more complicated. Open source projects vary wildly in size and resources. Some are maintained by massive teams with structured security audits, professional developers, and real funding. Others are maintained by one person working evenings and weekends unpaid, trying to keep up with bug reports while also holding down a day job, and the internet runs on both kinds. In 2014, the security world was rocked by the discovery of Heartbleed. It was a bug in a tiny piece of software called OpenSSL, open source code that powers the encrypted connections across a massive portion of the internet. The bug had existed for 2 years. It allowed anyone who knew about it to quietly extract sensitive information from servers around the world. The code was public. Technically, anyone could have caught it, but almost nobody had audited that particular corner of the code in years because the team maintaining it was tiny and underfunded. More recently, in 2024, a carefully planned supply chain attack was caught almost by accident. A malicious actor had spent 2 years building trust inside an open source project called XZ Utils, a core compression library used in many Linux distributions. The attacker contributed code, helped with maintenance, earned the community's trust, and then quietly introduced malicious code that would have given attackers a backdoor into millions of Linux systems. It was caught. Barely. By a Microsoft engineer who noticed his test environment was unusually slow and started digging. The attack was sophisticated, it was patient, and it very nearly worked. The lesson isn't that open source is bad. The lesson is that open source is not magic. It requires human eyes, human time, and human resources to actually be safe. And sometimes those resources aren't there. Here's another thing people don't think about when they switch to Linux: DNS. Every time you visit a website, your computer has to ask a server, what's the address of this website? That's called a DNS request. It's like asking a phone book for a number. And those requests go somewhere, usually to your internet service provider. That means your ISP has a detailed log of every website you've tried to visit. Not what you did there, not the content, but the fact that you went. Your ISP knows if you visited a medical site late at night. They know if you visited a news site associated with a certain political view. They know the pattern of your online life. And in many states in the US, ISPs are legally allowed to sell that data. They can package it up and hand it to advertisers. Linux doesn't change this. Your operating system has nothing to do with DNS requests. The packets leave your computer the same way regardless of what's installed. To address this, you need encrypted DNS, something called DNS over HTTPS or DNS over TLS. Most people who switch to Linux for privacy have never heard of it. Most people who have been using Linux for years have never set it up. And VPNs. We need to talk about VPNs. VPNs have become the privacy industry's favorite product, and also, perhaps, its biggest illusion. A VPN, a virtual private network, creates an encrypted tunnel between your computer and a server somewhere else. Your ISP can no longer see what websites you're visiting. The websites you visit see the VPN server's IP address, not yours. If you're using public Wi-Fi, nobody on that network can easily snoop on your traffic. That's real. Those are real benefits. But here's what the ads don't tell you. A VPN doesn't make you anonymous. It just moves the trust. Instead of trusting your ISP not to watch what you do, you're trusting the VPN company. And VPN companies are businesses. They have servers. They have logs. Some of them, despite what their marketing says, keep records. Some of them are owned by companies and countries with data sharing agreements with the US government. Some of them have been caught lying about their no logs policy. More importantly, a VPN does nothing about browser fingerprinting, nothing about cookies, nothing about the Google account you're logged into, nothing about the Facebook pixel tracking you across websites. A VPN hides your IP address, and your IP address is actually one of the less unique things about you online. Switching to Linux, installing a VPN, and then continuing to use Chrome logged into your Google account while visiting sites embedded with Google Analytics is a bit like putting a disguise on your car but driving your own distinctive custom license plate. You're hiding some things, but the things that matter most remain fully visible. And then there's the phone in your pocket. This is the part that people really don't want to think about. You've switched to Linux, you're feeling good, you're running Firefox with uBlock Origin, you've set up a VPN, you're using a private search engine, and then you pick up your iPhone or your Android phone and scroll through Instagram for 20 minutes. Your phone knows more about you than your computer ever did. It knows your physical location in real time. It knows who you called. It knows your sleep patterns from your activity data. It knows the stores you walked past. It knows whether you were at a bar last Friday or a church on Sunday. It knows your face because you unlocked it 100 times today. And it's uploading a lot of that constantly to Apple, to Google, to every app you've given location permissions to every advertiser that bought access to the data those apps sell. The operating system on your laptop may be open source and transparent, but if you're carrying a surveillance device in your pocket at all times, and most of us are, the Linux installation is almost irrelevant in the larger picture of your privacy. Now let's talk about psychology. Because part of what makes this whole conversation so complicated is the way security feels versus the way security actually works. There's a concept in cybersecurity called security theater. It's when something looks like protection without actually providing it. The feeling of safety without the substance of safety. Switching to Linux can be a form of security theater for some people. Not because Linux is bad, but because the switch feels so significant, so deliberate, so countercultural, that it can create a false sense of completion. Like, I did the hard thing, I made the sacrifice, now I'm safe. But privacy is not a single action. It's an ongoing practice. It's a series of decisions made every day, in every context. Which browser, which search engine, which email provider, which apps, which services, how you behave, what you share, what you click, who you trust. And the uncomfortable truth, the one privacy communities sometimes resist, is that you can install the most paranoid, privacy-hardened Linux distribution on the planet and completely undo it by logging into Gmail, using WhatsApp, carrying an Android phone, and letting Spotify know exactly what music you're listening to at every moment of your life. The operating system is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it. There's a difference, and this matters, between privacy, anonymity, and security. And a lot of people conflate them. Privacy means keeping your information away from people who shouldn't have it. Anonymity means not being identifiable at all. Security means protecting your systems from being compromised or broken into. These are related, but they're not the same. And different tools address different problems. Linux, in most configurations, helps with security. It reduces certain types of telemetry. It gives you more control over your system. It's generally harder to compromise than Windows for a home user, but it doesn't automatically give you privacy from the internet, and it doesn't make you anonymous. True anonymity online requires extraordinary effort. It means using the Tor network, which routes your traffic through multiple encrypted relays. It means never logging into any account that's associated with your real identity. It means being extremely careful about the websites you visit, the information you type, the behavior patterns you establish. It means accepting a significantly slower and more limited internet experience. Almost nobody does this. Almost nobody needs to. But it's worth understanding the gap between what Linux provides and what people believe Linux provides. Now, something needs to be said clearly here because this conversation can start to feel hopeless, and it shouldn't. Linux is genuinely better for privacy than Windows in some important ways, and those ways matter. It dramatically reduces operating system level data collection. It gives you transparency and control over your own machine. It puts you in a community that cares deeply about these issues, which often leads to learning about other privacy tools and practices. Many Linux users run better browser configurations, use better search engines, choose better email providers, not because Linux forces them to, but because switching to Linux is often the beginning of a broader education about digital privacy. The best privacy-focused Linux distributions, things like Tails, which runs entirely in memory and leaves no trace, or Wonix, which routes all traffic through Tor, are genuinely impressive tools. Journalists, whistleblowers, and activists in dangerous situations use them. They work. For specific, serious use cases, they can be transformative. But for the average person who switched to Linux because they were tired of Windows updates and heard it was more private, and who is now running Ubuntu while still using Google for everything, the gain is real but modest. And the gap between the protection they have and the protection they believe they have can be significant. Let's talk about something that almost nobody in the Linux community wants to acknowledge: the AI layer. We are entering an era where the tracking that felt dystopian 5 years ago looks almost quaint. AI systems don't just track what you do, they infer what you think. They predict what you'll do next. They build psychological models of who you are based on behavioral patterns you don't even notice yourself. A company doesn't need to know your name to know you. They need to know your patterns, and your patterns are everywhere, in the time between when you receive an email and when you respond to it, in the speed at which you scroll through certain types of content, and what you stop to read and what you skip, in the specific combination of apps and services you use. When AI gets woven into advertising and surveillance networks, and it already is, and it's accelerating, the fingerprint doesn't just look like your device anymore. It starts to look like your mind. And your operating system? It's not even in the equation. Here's where all of this lands. The people who moved to Linux because they were sick of being treated as products were not wrong to feel that way. The feeling that inspired them was real. The anger was justified. The desire for something better was, and is, completely legitimate. But the destination some of them arrived at was a myth. The idea that installing a free operating system is a solution to surveillance capitalism. The idea that the operating system was the problem. The idea that there is a single switch you can flip and become free. The real problem is the architecture of the modern internet. An architecture built on advertising. An architecture where the way companies make money is by knowing as much about you as possible, selling that knowledge, and using it to influence your decisions. That architecture doesn't care what's on your hard drive. It lives in the websites you visit, the apps you use, the accounts you log into, the services you depend on. And here's the deepest, most uncomfortable truth in all of this. Most Linux users are still living almost entirely inside the ecosystem of the companies they're trying to escape. They're searching on Google. They're watching YouTube. They're using Gmail. They're buying from Amazon. They're on Reddit, which sells data. They're on Discord, which stores your messages. They're carrying iPhones and Android devices. The operating system was never the prison. The services were. And we walked back into those services the moment we opened the browser. Which brings us to the original question, the one in the title of this video, the one that maybe brought you here. Is Linux actually private? The honest answer is more private than Windows in some meaningful ways, but not private in the way most people believe when they make the switch, and not private in the ways that matter most to how the modern internet actually tracks you. Privacy is not a product. It's not something you can download and install. It's not a single decision made on a Saturday afternoon when you finally get frustrated enough to wipe your hard drive and start fresh. It's a practice, a discipline, a series of small choices made constantly. It requires understanding the systems that are watching you. It requires a willingness to change your behavior, not just your software. And it requires accepting a deeply uncomfortable truth. In the modern internet, there is no such thing as perfect privacy. There's only varying degrees of exposure. The question isn't whether you can become invisible. You probably can't. The question is, who do you want to be visible to and how much, and on whose terms? Linux can be one piece of that answer, but only one piece. And if it becomes the answer to the whole question, if you install it, feel safe, and stop thinking, then in a way it may have made things worse because now you have a false sense of protection. And a false sense of protection might be more dangerous than no protection at all. So the next time someone tells you to switch to Linux for privacy, don't dismiss them. They're not wrong. But ask a follow-up question. Ask them what search engine they use. Ask them if they still have a Gmail account. Ask them what browser they're running on that private Linux machine. Ask them what's on their phone. Because the real conversation about digital privacy isn't about operating systems. It's about power, about who controls the infrastructure of information, about the business model of the internet and who it serves, about whether the phrase, "If the product is free, you are the product," applies only to software, or to everything we do online, every minute of every day, on every device we own. Linux is free, open source is free, and it's good. But the internet that runs on top of it, that runs on your data, your attention, your behavior, your patterns, your thoughts, and that internet doesn't have an operating system you can switch. The machine was never just your computer. It was always bigger than that.